Okay, welcome to our duplication tutorial. I'm going to be talking about a couple of different ways to duplicate your shape to get some really neat and interesting geometry. So the first thing you're going to want to do is make a shape. I have made a little cube here. I'm not going to really change much about it, but I am going to duplicate it into some neat patterns. So I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. Now to duplicate just normally, it is Control-D with your shape selected, and then you can move it and have a nice little duplicate. If you do, however, want to isolate any duplication to make sure that you can edit it, this goes for any mesh pretty much at all. So like if you're working on something and it's very complex and you're getting a little overwhelmed with how much is in a space, but you can't really move it because it needs to be in the location it's in the scene, you can come up here and click this little isolate button. So it's only what you're working on is in the viewport. I find that helps quite a bit when I have a lot of duplicated items or just a really filled scene in general. But this is not the type of duplicate that we want. We want to delete this one. So what we're going to do is there are a couple of different types of duplications other than just the standard. So if I come up here to edit, down here in the middle is duplicate. So there is normal duplicate, which is Control-D. And then there's also duplicate special and duplicate with transform. So the first one we're going to talk about is this duplicate special. I am going to click my shape, make sure I'm in my queue, normal selection tool. I'm going to hit edit, duplicate special, options, just because there's some kind of neat stuff going on inside of duplicate special. So the first thing it's going to ask you is what kind of geometry type do you want? So there's copy or instance. A copy will have its own attributes and will technically be its own mesh with its own UVs. And it's very easy to change each individual piece of that mesh. So each part of the duplicate is its own individual object. Instance is everything is shared. It's very efficient. There's only one UV. And if you need to scale or modify it, all of them change as the one does. So depending on what type of mesh and duplicate you might need, choosing copy or instance will change that. Now parent, world, or new group just says, hey, do you want all of the duplicates to be parented underneath the original? Do you want them to be their own world objects? Or do you want to make a new group of those objects? For me, I'm going to change that to new group just because I'm going to do some fun stuff to the overall duplicate later this afternoon, not in a video. Then you have your translates, rotates, and scale. This is what do you want this mesh to do? We'll talk about that in a second. The number is how many copies do you want? Pretty standardatory. And then do you want to input any graphs, connections, leaf nodes, or assign unique names? These are all personal preference. I don't tend to use any of those too much, but they are there and they're pretty neat for specific circumstances. Now, something to keep in mind is your translate, rotate, and scales work based off of X, Y, and Z. So this first box section is in the X, middle is in the Y, and this third one is in the Z. Your transform will move or translate or your object in a direction. Your rotate works off of degrees and your scale works off of units. Rotate Y will create more circular changes, and scaling is exponential, so things will get really complex really quick. So for instance, with translate, let's say I want it to move 5 units, and we're going to have 5 copies. I'm going to hit apply. So you can see it makes 5 copies perfectly spaced, 5 units away from each other, and then there's 5 of them. So I'll take that back to 0. Let's say we want to rotate in Y. We'll do 5 degrees with 5. If I hit apply, you can see they rotated on that X or that Y axis from the origin point. So if I do translate of 5 with a rotate of 5, you can see I start to get this arcing pattern. So I will need a lot of copies, maybe, I don't know, 50. We'll figure out how to do the math in a minute. And you can see we're starting to get a lot of different copies to our shape. take that back to 0, take that back to 0, and then scale, as I said, is exponential. So let's say we have 5 copies. Let's scale, for instance, all of them 5. Hit apply. They are all nesting dolled inside each other. And if I move them, let's say translate 100, you can see they're all nesting dolled. Delete that copy. So I'm going to put that back to scale 111, translate to 0. Okay, so one of the really cool things, and one of the most math-based things inside of working in the digital sphere, is being able to figure out how to compute spheres and circles and round things inside of Maya. So this is one of the few ways that I found that I use math very often inside of Maya, other than just normal computing simulation things. So let's say we wanted to duplicate 20 spheres around in a circle. What we would need to do is take that 20 and divide it by the 360 degrees it takes for a full circle. So for that, knowing I want 20 shapes, I need to rotate in the Y 18 degrees for each shape. So if I hit apply, make sure I have it selected, you can see I now have a fully rotated circle. Now let's say I want to translate it 5. You can see I have a wide circle. The reason this happens is because that 20 divided by the 360 gives us our degrees, which is awesome. Now if you count, there's only 19 shapes. There's not actually 20. That's because it's computing the original number, that original shape, with all of those other ones. So there's 20, it's just including the original 2. So if we needed to have actual 20 shapes, we would need to make 21, apply, and get something a little bit more interesting and unique. And remember, this is on top of the last one, because anytime you duplicate special, it compounds with your last duplicate special. It continues the cycle. And yeah, you can get some really neat, fun shapes using this method. Now the other way to duplicate, I'm just going to delete both of those. So now I have my cube. I'm going to go ahead and help future self and reset my settings on my duplicate special. And then I'm going to come back over here to edit and duplicate with transform. Now, this one is a little bit more interesting. It allows you to duplicate the transforms of an object. So just to kind of show you how it works, I'm going to delete that shape, make a new one. And I'm going to just scale it a little bit. Now, normally when you duplicate something, it doesn't keep transform data. It just only keeps what the shape actually is in that moment. So a way to think about this duplicate with transform is it's a quick way to get rotation, location, and scale increments that are extremely accurate. So it is Shift D. So if I do Shift D, And there you go. That's how to duplicate transform. So other tools that you might just need to kind of be aware of are things like the bevel tool. So let's say on this edge right here, I wanted to add a bevel. So I'm going to highlight all of those edges. I'm going to come up here to Edit Mesh. Bevel is also Control B. If I give that a click, fraction is how many edge loops or how deep do you want that to be? How many segments, so how rounded? What's the depth? Is it convex or concave? The metering is just pretty much like how far apart are those edge loops. And meter along kind of goes hand in hand with that. And then do you want chamfering on or off? Do you just want to see that edge, or do you just want all the edge loops? Detach is a really cool tool under Edit Mesh. Pretty much it just says, hey, this shape, detach it. It's a really good way if you are making a shape that you want to have like a lid, or if you just need to cut apart a shape really quick. So I'm gonna leave that there. There is also something called merge to center or merge. So I'm just gonna make an edge loop here and here and here and here. And I'm gonna hit Q. And then what I'm gonna do is all it does is says, hey, I want to take these vertices to a center point location. So I'm going to select two vertices, come up here to Edit Mesh, and click Merge or Merge to Center. They do very similar things, but as you can see, it just merges all the vertices that were selected to the center. Hitting G will also repeat any tool that you've just used. So all of those edges are now starred into the center. I'm going to Control Z a bunch because I don't really need that. Flip is a really neat tool. I'm just going to grab these vertices right here, move them down in space. So all Flip does is says, hey, flip the vertices of the details that I want on a symmetrical edge. So I will have to make an edge loop here in the center, or here in the center. So what I'll do is I will select those vertices right there. I'm going to come up here to Edit Mesh and hit Flip, and it's going to be like, hey, pick an edge for symmetry. I'm going to do this one, and you can see now it just moves the vertices. It does not keep the original details. Do it again. Pick an edge. Flips it back. Now, Symmetrize, I don't know, the symmetry tool works similar to Flip, however it copies the edges selected to the other side instead of just flipping it around. So I can come up here to Edit Mesh, Symmetry, pick an edge, and now both of the sides are equal. Now this middle section, I'd have to go back and fix the tessellation of, but both of these vertices now match. It's kind of neat. Now let's say, delete all that. I'm going to fix the tessellation on that edge. And same with this one. Not so much worried about the height, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to mirror this shape. So pretty much the options that you have for mirror is you can come up here and go to Mesh, Mirror Options. Do you want the geometry to be cut in half? apply for this exercise, do not. All it says is say, hey, do you want two pieces of geometry, even though they're going to be the same object? So I'm going to say no. Do you want it to be a copy, an instance, or just a flip? For this, I just want a flip. And then you hit apply. So you can see it just flips my shape based off of the axis that I'm looking for. So if you just need to flip your shape in a different direction, that's a nice way to do it. So I'm going to do copy. I'm going to do Y, hit apply. And when I move it, see how they kind of like molded at the edges? Because it's trying to connect my vertices together because I have merge borders on. If I do not want merges, it'll still kind of do it because I still have combine with original on. So you can see they are combined at that edge. So I'm going to hit combine with original. I'm going to bridge and merge edges. I'm going to flip in the X. And then I'll flip in the Z. So you can see kind of wants to be together. If I hit cut, it's just going to say like, hey, don't combine them as much. And if I don't want them to combine at all, when I click away and hit apply, they're now two separate objects. It's just a really fun tool, and it definitely makes life really easy when you are trying to make something like a character or a really complex mesh. And you don't want to do two sides, you just want to do the one. So a couple of ways to fix holes inside of Maya is the target weld tool. So if I come up here to mesh tools, there is target weld. Pretty much it says, hey, drag one vertex to another, and they will merge their vertices at that point. So this is really good if you're like, hey, this one side of my mesh is not attached, but they need to be on this other side anyway, so it's okay. So you can just move them all to the one side. There is also the merge tool. Just merges them right to the center. There is that, where'd it go? Merge to center button I showed you earlier. It's very similar. There's also something called Append to Polygon. Pretty much it says, hey, these darker, thicker green edges are where there is a hole in your mesh. So if you click on one of them, it'll highlight all of the other hole spots in your mesh, and you can click the other purple line that's where you want it to go. So I want to kind of fill this triangle here. And it'll just build a mesh once you hit enter. It'll just build some tessellation there for you. This is nice because it allows you to build off of empty edges. It'll allow you to create triangles or quads. And it's just a really nice way to fill a small hole when it's needed. Now, you can also use something called the bridge tool, which pretty much uses multi-cut to recreate edge loops. So if I go up here to edit mesh, yes. So if I go up here to edit mesh, there's this button right here called bridge. So if you click that, you want to select two edges, click bridge, and it'll just build you a face based off of whatever edge you have selected. Remember, G duplicates a tool. And then there is a tool called fill hole, which to me is absolute witchcraft because it's super cool. So let's say you have a mesh and you're just like, man, I had some weird tessellation. I had to remove a face. So you can come up here to mesh and click fill hole, and it'll just do it. Absolute witchcraft. Do be careful when doing complex meshes because sometimes it will get a little confused and try to fill the whole shape. This works for very simple kind of edits. So let's say if I had Oh, come back here to edge. If I control delete those, delete that face. If I come up here, make sure I'm in object mode and do mesh fill hole, it'll still fill it, but just be aware, like if you have any weird convex or concurve tool holes, or if you have a lot of weird holes, it might not work properly. So for instance, if I delete this one and this one and this one, go object mode, mesh, fill hole, it'll fill them. But if my geometry gets a little bit more complex, or if it has any holes on the curves, sometimes it doesn't like it as much. So for instance, if I have here and here. See how the geometry needs to be rebuilt? You can run into some problems with that. It is absolute witchcraft and is a really cool tool though. And that's it. Those are all of the base modeling tools that you're going to run into. There's a few more for fixing things like booleans and things like that, but that is going to be a different video.